In the small artistic town of Maple Creek, New England, with its historic buildings and gathering of artists, Caroline Bradshaw was brewing coffee in her worn apartment kitchen, bathed in morning light. Through the window, she could see the Victorian building in the center of town, with the golden sign of Bradshaw Gallery gleaming in the morning sun on the top floor. Caroline gazed for just a moment at that place, once her family's pride, now a distant entity. "Mom, look! I finished it." Caroline's thoughts were interrupted by her 5-year-old son Noah's energetic voice. In his small hands was a drawing paper with a cat painted in surprisingly delicate strokes. It wasn't just a child's scribble but a picture with remarkable expressiveness that captured even the emotions behind the cat's eyes. "That's wonderful, Noah," Caroline smiled, gently stroking her son's brown curls. "This cat looks so alive." "It's the same one from the park." "Its eyes looked sad," he said. Caroline was amazed at her son's observational skills while also seeing herself in his words. She too had an eye for discerning emotions behind surfaces. That talent was now being put to use in her job, teaching children's art classes at the local community art center. The walls of her modest but clean apartment were adorned with landscapes and abstract paintings Caroline had created. Her work was also being displayed in small local cafes and restaurants, gradually gaining recognition. However, this was far from the success her parents had once expected of her. "Now, after breakfast, we're going to my class today," Caroline said as she placed cereal and a banana in front of Noah. "We have a special guest today. Louise, a famous potter in town." "Yay!" Noah's eyes sparkled. "Can I make something with clay?" "Yes, of course," Caroline answered. "You can let your imagination run wild." Imagination. That was what her parents, Richard and Eleanor Bradshaw, had always tried to push aside in favor of practical business sense. They ran the oldest and most prestigious art gallery in town. But for them, art was merely a commodity, an investment, and a symbol of social status. Richard carried the pride of a generations-old distinguished family, known for his cool judgment and unwavering decisiveness. Eleanor was a central figure in the town's charitable activities, outwardly warm and sociable, but beneath her elegant appearance, she possessed a will of steel and strict moral standards. And Caroline's sister Victoria was always the perfect daughter. She graduated from an Ivy League school with excellent grades, earned an MBA, and returned to the family business to work as her father's right hand. She followed the life her parents expected and earned respect as a young businesswoman in town. As Caroline prepared for the morning, she occasionally glanced out the window. Today was Friday, there would be a special exhibition at the gallery this weekend. She used to be involved in such preparations. Especially during high school, her artistic talent was recognized by teachers, and she won several local young artist competitions. But her parents categorized her talent as a hobby and expected her to enter the business world in the future. "Art is a wonderful talent, but you can't live on that alone," her mother Eleanor often said. "As a Bradshaw daughter, you should choose a more practical path." As Caroline buttoned her son's uniform, she remembered herself at 17. The days she spent painting alone in the art room until late at night. And the day she met him, a senior in the art club who also struggled between his family's expectations and his own passion. They became each other's confidants and eventually fell in love. But that relationship turned into one night's mistake, and her life changed completely. When the pregnancy test showed positive, she was only 17. It took weeks to find the courage to tell her parents, but the result was far more violent than she had anticipated. "Mom, let's go." Noah's voice interrupted her thoughts. He had already put on his backpack and was waiting by the door. "Yes, let's go." Caroline shook off the memories of the past and put on a smile. Before leaving the apartment, she checked her appearance in the small mirror by the entrance. Brown curly hair, greenish blue eyes, a slightly tired expression. She took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. Now she had no time to lament the past. She could only move forward, for Noah's future. On the way to the art center, her cell phone rang. Looking at the screen, she saw a name that hadn't rung for 5 years. Victoria. Caroline stared at the phone, feeling her chest tighten. Contact after 5 years. What had happened? After a moment's hesitation, she answered. Caroline, it's me. I want to talk to you. Her sister's voice sounded a bit tense. Caroline caught her breath. Has something happened? I want to talk to you in person. Please. Caroline remained silent for a long time. Noah held her hand, looking up curiously. All right, she finally answered. When? Tomorrow, if that's okay with you. Caroline gazed at the town center. On this Friday morning, the flag of the Bradshaw Gallery was fluttering in the breeze. All right. After hanging up, Caroline exhaled deeply. She felt the new life she had built over 5 years begin to waver with one phone call. She gripped Noah's hand tightly and began walking forward. At 17, Caroline had locked herself in a school bathroom stall, staring at the pregnancy test with trembling hands. 2 lines clearly appeared. The same result for the 3rd test. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. After school, she returned home later than usual. The Bradshaw mansion stood with dignity in the twilight. As Caroline passed through the gate, she felt her heartbeat echoing in her ears. As she entered the entrance hall, her mother Eleanor's voice came from somewhere. Caroline? You're quite late. In the living room were her parents and sister Victoria. Her father Richard was reading a newspaper, and her mother was reviewing some committee documents. Victoria had her laptop open, working on college assignments. It was like a snapshot of a perfect family portrait. I'm sorry, I was finishing a piece in the art room, Caroline lied. In reality, she had been sitting alone on a bench in a park near the school for hours. I kept dinner warm for you, her mother said. Wash your hands first. Caroline put her bag on the floor and clenched her fists. I have something to tell you, she said in a voice smaller than she had intended. What is it? Her mother replied without looking up from her papers. It's important. Her tone finally made both parents look up. Victoria also looked away from her laptop out of curiosity. What is it? Her father asked, setting aside his newspaper. About your grades. Caroline felt her throat go dry. No. Richard and Eleanor began to notice their daughter's unusual tension, and their expressions tightened. I'm pregnant. At that moment, the air in the room froze. Caroline stared at her parents' faces, witnessing their expressions change from shock to disbelief, then to anger. What did you say? Richard's voice was low and dangerously quiet. I'm pregnant. I think I'm in my 3rd month, Caroline continued with a trembling voice. With David. That poor boy from the art club. Eleanor's face twisted. Caroline tried to object, but her father's explosion of anger drowned it out. You are not my daughter. Richard stood up and shouted. His voice echoed against the walls of the mansion. To bring such shame to us. To soil the Bradshaw name. Dad, please, listen. Caroline pleaded through tears. Get out. This time Eleanor screamed. You've hurt our honor. Do you plan to make us the laughingstock of the town? Caroline looked at Victoria. Her 14-year-old sister stood dumbfounded, with an expression of fear and confusion. But she said nothing. I want to have this baby. Caroline placed both hands on her abdomen. David also. David? Richard sneered. You think that dropout will take responsibility? His family is among the poorest in town. What can they do? He's a talented painter. Caroline protested. The professors recognize his talent. He could. Enough about that man, Eleanor interrupted. You'll get it taken care of immediately. I'll contact a doctor. No. Caroline cried out. I want to have this baby. Richard's face turned red with anger. Get out now. You can never return to this house. His voice was cold, like a final decision. Dad, please. Now. Richard banged on the table. If you choose that disgrace, then I no longer recognize you as a member of the Bradshaw family. Eleanor stood up and pointed to the stairs. Take only what you absolutely need and leave. You'll bear the consequences of your decision yourself. For the next 30 minutes, Caroline packed as many clothes and valuables as she could fit into a backpack, crying in her room. The door opened, and Victoria timidly entered. Sis. She said in a trembling voice. Vicky, it's okay, Caroline smiled at her sister through tears. You've done nothing wrong. But, where will you go? I don't know, Caroline answered honestly. But I'll be fine, I'll manage somehow. Take this money, Victoria whispered, handing her sister several $100s from her piggy bank. Thank you, Caroline hugged her sister. I love you. Don't forget that. When she descended the stairs, her parents gave her cold looks. Without any farewell words, Caroline walked out the front door of the Bradshaw house. The night's coldness enveloped her, and she began walking down the road, shivering. That night, she contacted David. However, his response was completely different from what she had expected. I can't do this, Caroline, he said over the phone. My father arranged a scholarship for me. I can go to art school in New York next month. I can't throw everything away for a child. But you said you loved me, Caroline's voice was trembling. I'm sorry, his voice conveyed more relief than regret. I really like you, but I'm not ready to be a father. You understand, right? After the call ended, Caroline sat hugging her knees crying in the phone booth. She wandered the town all night and headed to high school in the morning, exhausted. No home, no lover. She had only her baby and a small amount of money. Caroline. In front of the school's art room, Ms. Grace Anderson called out to her in surprise. What are you doing here so early? Are you all right? Caroline looked up at her teacher with a face pale from fatigue and cold. She couldn't say anything, just collapsed in tears. Ms. Grace hugged her and whispered softly, What happened? What's wrong? And Caroline told her everything. Her parents' anger, being thrown out, David's betrayal. Ms. Grace listened silently, gently stroking her shoulder. Come to my house, the teacher said decisively. You're not alone. I'll help you. Caroline nodded with inexpressible gratitude. She was still 17, pregnant, abandoned by her family, and at a loss. But in that moment, she found a glimmer of hope. For her child's sake, and to stand on her own feet someday, she had to be strong. Noah, we're almost done here. Caroline called out to her son, who continued to draw intently by the window, as she cleaned up the scattered art supplies on the art studio floor. The twilight light dyed his brown curls golden, and shadows danced with each movement of his small hands across the drawing paper. 5 years had passed, and Caroline's life had taken a direction she never imagined. With Miss Grace's help, she graduated from high school and earned an art education qualification at a local community college. Now she ran children's painting classes at the town's art studio, earning a stable income. Though not luxurious, it was enough for her and Noah's life. Mom, look. Noah happily held up his drawing. This is you and me playing in the park. Caroline gasped as she saw her son's work. The composition and use of color were incredible for a child, and above all, the emotional expression he captured was astonishing. Two figures, clearly her and Noah, were depicted walking hand in hand through an autumn park. The colors of the trees in the background beautifully expressed the changing season, and a gentle happiness floated in the expressions of the two. "Noah, this is wonderful," Caroline hugged her son. "You really do have talent." Noah smiled happily at his mother's praise. "My teacher said so too. She said I have special talent." Caroline smiled, but inside she felt complex emotions stirring. Noah's talent was undeniably inherited from her, but also from David. Since that day, she had never tried to track David's whereabouts. Rumor had it he had graduated from art school in New York and was successful in the commercial art world. But Caroline didn't even know if he was aware he had a son. "Mom, what are we eating tonight?" Noah's question interrupted her thoughts. "Well, since today is a special day." Caroline smiled. "How about pizza?" "Yay!" Noah jumped for joy. "With lots of cheese." "Of course." As they locked the studio and began walking through the twilight town, Caroline felt a bit nervous. After the phone call with Victoria, she hadn't slept all night. The next morning, she sent a reply message to her sister: "Let's meet at the Central Park Cafe at 3 p.m. tomorrow." Tomorrow. The day she would meet a family member after 5 years. Her heart was heavy, swirling with complex emotions. Back at the apartment, they enjoyed their delivered pizza, talking about the day's events as usual. Noah enthusiastically told about adventures with his classmates, praise from his teacher, and oddly shaped clouds he saw in the park. While Caroline's heart warmed at her son's innocent joy, the thought of tomorrow's meeting wouldn't leave her mind. After Noah fell asleep, Caroline sat at the small desk in the living room and opened an old scrapbook. It contained high school memories, newspaper articles from when she won art contests, and the last photo with her parents. She touched the photo, feeling its coldness. The next afternoon, Caroline dropped Noah off at the studio's children's program earlier than usual and headed to Central Park alone. Sitting at a cafe terrace table, nervously stirring her coffee, a familiar figure entered her view. Caroline. Victoria looked more mature and refined than 5 years ago. Dressed in a perfect suit, she exuded the Bradshaw family's dignity. But her expression showed anxiety and tension. "Vicky," Caroline stood up, unsure how to react. Should she hug her, or keep the greeting formal? Victoria moved first, lightly embracing her sister. "It's been a while. You look well." "Yes, more or less," Caroline returned to her seat and invited her sister to join. "You've really grown up too." For a while, the two spent time on superficial topics like the weather and changes in town. Eventually, Victoria took a deep breath and got to the point. "I'm getting married next month." "Congratulations," Caroline said sincerely. "Who's the lucky man?" "James Harrington. He's the son of one of Dad's friends." Victoria smiled a bit shyly. "We first met through our parents, but he's really a wonderful person." Seeing her sister's happy face, Caroline felt relief rather than envy. "That's wonderful." "Caroline," Victoria's expression turned serious. "I want you to come to the wedding." Caroline put down her coffee cup, unable to hide her surprise. "Me? But your parents?" "Our parents want to reconcile too," Victoria said. "Especially since Dad recently fell ill." "Richard?" Caroline found it strange to say her father's name. For 5 years, she had tried not to think about her parents. "Yes, his heart hasn't been well since last year," Victoria explained worriedly. "The doctors say he should reduce his workload and stress, but Dad is as stubborn as ever." Caroline was hit with complex emotions. Anger and hatred toward the father who had once rejected her, and at the same time, somewhere deep inside, concern due to their blood connection. Also, James's family is well known in town. Victoria continued reluctantly. They expect a wedding with the entire family present. So you're calling me to keep up appearances? Caroline's voice betrayed a slight bitterness. No. Victoria quickly objected. It's what I want. You're my sister. I don't want to celebrate my best day without you. Caroline looked out the window. In the park, children were playing, couples walking, dogs running around. Ordinary everyday scenes. The new life she had built with her son. What about Noah? She asked. Victoria hesitated slightly. Of course, he's welcome too. I'd like to meet my nephew. Caroline considered what effect bringing her parents back into her life sphere would have on Noah. He had asked about his grandparents before, but she always vaguely answered, they live far away. Let me think about it, Caroline finally said. It's not an easy decision. Victoria showed understanding. Of course. But I'd appreciate it if you could let me know as soon as possible. As they parted, Victoria handed Caroline an envelope. The wedding invitation. And something else, our parents asked me to give you. Caroline took the second envelope, feeling its weight. What's this? I don't know, Victoria answered honestly. They just asked me to give it to you directly. Back at the apartment, after Noah had fallen asleep, Caroline cautiously opened the second envelope. Inside was a check and a short letter. Caroline, this is part of the trust fund you should have received. We can discuss the rest if you wish. Richard Bradshaw. She gasped seeing the amount of the check. It was more than she would earn in a year. That night, Caroline lay awake thinking. The next morning, she made her decision. Perhaps it was time to heal the wounds of the past, for Noah's sake and her own. She sent Victoria a message, I'll come to the wedding. I'll bring Noah. 3 days later, on Saturday afternoon, the doorbell to Caroline's apartment rang. When she opened it, her parents stood there after 5 years. Richard looked older than before, with more gray hair. Eleanor was still elegantly dressed, but the wrinkles around her eyes had increased. Caroline, Richard's voice didn't possess as much authority as before. Please come in, Caroline invited them, nervous but calm. As they entered the living room, Noah was sitting on the sofa surrounded by art supplies, drawing. He looked up with curious eyes at the unfamiliar visitors. Noah, these are. Caroline hesitated for a moment, then continued, your grandfather and grandmother. The moment Richard and Eleanor looked at Noah, they both froze. Noah was drawing a forest landscape with sunlight shining through the trees after rain. Its technique and color sense possessed a level of completion unimaginable for a 5-year-old. What is this? Richard's voice was trembling. He slowly approached Noah and took the drawing. Eleanor also gasped, staring at the picture over her husband's shoulder. Their expressions mixed surprise with something else, recognition, or perhaps pain from a memory. Richard stared at Caroline, lost for words. Noah, your tie is crooked, Caroline said as she straightened her son's small tuxedo. Are you nervous? Noah shook his head, but his large blue eyes showed anxiety. Will there be lots of grandpas and grandmas? Yes, Caroline smiled. But there's nothing to be afraid of. I'm sure everyone is looking forward to meeting you. Stepping into the grand ballroom of Harrington Plaza Hotel, Caroline gasped. Crystal chandeliers, an altar adorned with fresh flowers, and the town's dignitaries crowded the luxurious space. It was the first time since leaving the Bradshaw house that she felt like she was stepping back into her former world. Caroline. Victoria rushed over in her pure white wedding dress. You came. She hugged her sister tightly, then turned to Noah. So you're Noah. Nice to meet you, I'm Victoria. Noah, though a bit shy, greeted her politely. Congratulations on your wedding. Your dress is beautiful. Victoria laughed happily. Thank you. You look very handsome too. Richard and Eleanor approached from the corner of the venue. Since their reunion at the apartment days ago, they had maintained contact with Caroline, taking the first steps toward mending their relationship. Still, the public meeting was filled with tension. Caroline, I'm glad you came, Richard lightly kissed his daughter. Eleanor also greeted her similarly, giving Noah a gentle smile. It's a lovely ceremony, Caroline said. Befitting Victoria. The wedding proceeded solemnly, with Caroline and Noah quietly observing. As the reception began, Noah, seemingly a bit bored with the long formal event, took out his sketchbook and began quietly drawing in a corner of the sofa. Soon after, an exclamation of, "This is remarkable," was heard from the sofa's direction. Caroline turned to see Joseph Harrington, James's uncle known as a prominent art critic, peering into Noah's sketchbook. Such talent is rarely seen. Joseph called out to those around him, asking, "Whose child is this?" Caroline hurried to Noah's side. "He's my son." "And you are?" Joseph looked at Caroline with curious eyes. "Caroline Bradshaw." "Bradshaw?" Joseph's eyes lit up. "Richard and Eleanor's eldest daughter." Caroline nodded nervously. People began to gather around, and she felt uncomfortable suddenly becoming the center of attention. "The Bradshaw family's artistic talent has been passed down," Joseph said happily. "It reminds me of Richard's early works." "Father's works?" Caroline was confused. Joseph responded with a surprised expression. "Yes, of course. Richard Bradshaw was once a promising painter. His dramatic landscapes garnered attention for their unique sense of color. His decision to put down the brush to take over the gallery was a great loss to the art world." At that moment, the atmosphere in the venue changed. Many eyes turned to Richard and Eleanor, who stood uncomfortably. "I didn't know," Caroline said softly. Joseph was puzzled. "I thought you knew, especially since you've inherited the artistic talent yourself." The invited guests listened to the conversation with great interest. "About your family's talent?" a woman asked. "Yes," Caroline hesitantly answered. "I teach art. I run children's painting classes at a local art studio." "Is that so?" Joseph's eyebrows raised. "You seem to have considerable talent yourself. But why not at the Bradshaw Gallery?" "That's enough, Joseph," Richard approached and said in a stern tone. "No, I want to know." Caroline turned to face her father. "You were a painter. Then why did you deny my talent?" The venue fell silent, all eyes on Richard. He sighed deeply and looked at his wife. Eleanor's face showed fear and shame. Richard stumbled over his words. "I once had passion. But I learned that in the real world, one cannot live on art alone. So you wanted me to walk the same path." Caroline's voice betrayed sadness rather than anger. "Richard, Eleanor," Joseph said, "why would you treat your daughter and grandson with such wonderful talent?" "That's a private family matter," Eleanor quickly interrupted, grabbing Richard's arm. But it was too late. Whispers began to spread among the guests. "The Bradshaw's eldest daughter disappeared 5 years ago, that child is. I heard there was a scandal." Caroline grabbed Noah's hand, intending to leave the venue. She didn't want to ruin her sister's special day. But Victoria blocked her path. "Don't go," Victoria grabbed her sister's hand. Standing in the center of the venue in her bridal dress, she said loudly, "Today is my wedding. And what matters most to me is that my family is together again." She embraced Caroline and Noah, continuing, "I am truly happy that my sister and nephew have returned to us." Applause erupted from the venue. The Harrington family also sent warm glances, and James, Victoria's new husband, stood by his wife's side, placing a hand on her shoulder. Caroline, Richard approached his daughter, conscious of people's gazes but determined. We were wrong for our attitude that day. I apologize. Eleanor also stood beside her husband, gazing at Noah. We want your forgiveness. We want a chance to start over. Caroline regarded her parents calmly and said in a low voice, a simple apology isn't enough. If you truly care about Noah, show it through sincere reflection and action. Placing a hand on her son's shoulder, she continued, he has the right to make his own choices, and I respect those choices. If you can understand that, perhaps we can gradually restore our relationship. Richard and Eleanor nodded, accepting the public humiliation. On Christmas morning, snow quietly accumulated in the streets of Maple Creek. The view from Caroline's apartment window looked like a postcard. Mom, wake up. Santa came. Noah's excited voice woke Caroline. 6 months had passed since Victoria's wedding, and changes had gradually come to Caroline and Noah's lives. Under the small living room tree were more presents than ever before, including some from Richard and Eleanor. Is Grandpa coming? Noah asked with shining eyes. Yes, at 10 o'clock, Caroline answered. Her voice no longer held the rejection it once did, though it wasn't yet complete trust. After the wedding, Richard had kept his promise and began to reclaim his passion for art. He opened his long-ceiled studio and occasionally taught Noah how to paint. Eleanor also continued to build a relationship with her grandson, setting aside time each Saturday to spend in the park together. The Bradshaw Gallery was also changing gradually. Richard named a section of the gallery New Generation and started a program to discover and support young local talent. Works by Caroline's students were displayed there, and she herself occasionally held workshops. The doorbell rang, and when Caroline opened it, there was a sight she could never have imagined before. Richard and Eleanor stood there, holding large presents. Merry Christmas, Richard said. In his eyes was a warm light, not the cold dignity of the past. That afternoon, as they enjoyed Christmas dinner, the doorbell suddenly rang. When Caroline opened it, a man stood there. Caroline. His voice trembled slightly. It's been a while. David. Noah's father. He had suddenly contacted her after seeing Noah's talent featured in the newspaper. You can't come in, Caroline said calmly. For 5 years, not a single contact, no child support, and now what are you here for? I have rights, David raised his voice. That boy is my son. At that moment, Richard appeared at the door. You have no rights, he said in a stern tone. Neither legally nor morally. David flinched momentarily at the dignified presence of the Bradshaw family patriarch, but quickly retorted, I'll talk to the media. Genius boy's real father denied recognition. Feel free, Richard said calmly. However, before that, all of your past actions, including impregnating and abandoning a 17-year-old girl, will all become public. David's face changed color, and he eventually left. Later, it was revealed he had made the same mistake with another young woman and faced legal troubles for child support delinquency in multiple states. On Christmas night, after Noah had fallen asleep, Caroline sat in the living room with Richard and Eleanor. I haven't completely forgiven you, Caroline said quietly. But for Noah's sake, I want to move forward little by little. Richard nodded and took his wife's hand. We feel the same way. Outside the window, snow continued to fall quietly, and with expectations for the new year, seeds of change began to sprout little by little in their hearts.